Hey guys, this is Thomas over here at NurseMoneyTalk.com, and this video, what I want to do is I want to just kind of have a little bit of a discussion on whether or not you can get fired from your nursing job for making a medication error. Now, before I get to that, to the topic, if you're not already subscribed, I want to go ahead and invite you to hit that subscribe button on this channel. Talk about all things related to nursing student, and nurse life. So let's go ahead and just get right down to it, which is, with just our discussion for today on whether or not you can get fired for a medication error. Now, if you're listening to this, like, you might be like a new nurse, or you're about to graduate nursing school, or maybe you happen to be watching this and, you're a nurse who just made a mistake, a med error, and, you're kind of frantically nervous on whether or not you're about to get fired from your job. I think it's right out of the gate. I want to say, I think in all likelihood, you probably won't get fired, from your nursing job. And, there's a couple of reasons for that. So the first reason is that if hospitals were going around firing nurses every time they made a mistake, they wouldn't have any nurses left on staff. There was a study, I believe it was a 2010 study that came out, and I'll put a link to that in the description below, that pretty much said essentially 100% of nurses make mistakes. I mean, that's just kind of the nature of just kind of what happens when you have imperfect people, which there's no such thing as a perfect person. We're all imperfect people, working, albeit, trying their best, doing the best you can. But at the same time, you're an imperfect being, and so mistakes are going to happen. The other thing that I think you should understand is that there's kind of also a little bit of a legal precedence for this as well. Now, granted, I'm not an attorney or whatever, so I just want to get that out of the way, but just kind of doing a little bit of my own digging, what I did see was that there was actually a court case that came out and that actually went all the way to, this would have been the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. And pretty much, because generally speaking, like when you get terminated from your job, I think you're usually looking at, was there, willful misconduct involved in terms of you getting terminated from your job. And they said that medication errors are not considered willful misconduct for a nurse. The court ruled that inadvertent medication errors are not willful misconduct for a nurse. The court essentially shifted the burden to a nurse's employer to supervise and correct a nurse who commits medication errors. Now, the court applies the same standard to nurses that applies to other employees. Inadvertent mistakes are not willful misconduct, justifying termination. Nurses' mistakes can cause substantial harm to patients and can lead to legal liability for the employers, but in the court's mind, that did not change the general rule. I say all of that, I read all of that, and I'll put a link to that particular article in the descriptions. But I say all of that not to kind of encourage sloppiness in terms of what you do, but more or less to give you a little bit of peace that in the course of you being diligent at your job, if an error does happen, that doesn't automatically equal I'm gonna get fired from my job. Now, we should try to do better. And so let's talk real quick on some of the ways you can help prevent medication errors. And so the first one is to me like the obvious one, and I think a lot of nurses get around, and that's scanning your medication before you give it. But I think most importantly, you need to scan it when you're actually in the room with that patient. Because I've seen scenarios where, so if a nurse has like 5 patients that they have to give medications to, they'll scan literally all 5. They'll gather all the medications for all 5 patients. They'll scan it, maybe with a copy of the patient's armband or whatever that they just happen to have with them. and then they'll put it all into a cup and then take it into the room. Now, this might speed things up a bit, or quite a bit, depending on your facility, but it then kind of defeats some of those safety checks, because as you take that cup to go give that patient, then you can have errors happen to where, like, you, for instance, give the wrong medication cup to the wrong patient. And so I would definitely encourage you just to be mindful about not getting around some of those safety checks when it comes to scanning medications. The second thing is just to slow things down a tad bit, especially during MedPass. There's a lot of things we can do to speed things up a bit for how important MedPass is and how much of an impact the errors can cause when it's made. This is probably not the place to try to, speed things up and create shortcuts. And with that said, during your MedPass time, try to focus, avoid, being on the phone. Avoid just, maybe having chit chat with coworkers or whatever, and just kind of try to focus on passing your meds, making sure, making sure you have everything organized. The last point on this that I think is critical, but I think a lot of nurses will kind of miss this, and it might not apply to every nurse, and that's, try to talk to your patient, if possible, about what medications they're getting. Now, this kind of would go hand in hand if you are actually scanning the patient's medications, in their room, at the bedside. And then, as you're getting the medications together, you're getting your gabapentin, you're getting your Protonics, as you're saying it out loud. Especially if it's a patient that's aware of what medication they're supposed to have, you can have a situation where, like, oh wait, since when was I on gabapentin? I'm not supposed to have gabapentin. And then they can actually help kind of create another safety check in terms of, preventing medication errors. What happens if you do make a medication error? So, if you do make a medication error, I think the first thing you need to do is, first of all, understand what your facility protocol is when it comes to situations like this, and just follow that. But probably as a general thing, you'll probably need to notify the physician and see if there's anything special that needs to be done for that patient. Or whatnot, just kind of depending on, what medication you gave them that they weren't supposed to get, or how much of it that they got. And then also probably that patient will most likely require extra monitoring, just to kind of keep an eye out for any adverse effect related to that extra or wrong dosing. And then a lot of the facilities will probably require you to write an incident report as well. So just kind of know what your facility protocol is for situations like that. I'm sure, like, if you've worked with any senior nurse, I'm sure they'll probably know, because they probably would have made mistakes as well. So they'll probably know, what they need to do. It can be nerve-wracking. It can be frustrating when errors like this happen. But just make sure that you're being open and honest about it, and make sure that we're making sure that that patient gets the best treatment, depending on what the given situation is. The last thing I'm going to leave you with is this saying, Errare Humanum Est, which is Latin for to err is human. And so with that, just remember to give yourself some grace when something like this happens, and just learn from it. Thank you so much, and I'll catch you in that next video.